Hello everyone, and thank you for coming back to yet another episode of The Gloving Paradigm. I am your host, Peter, aka OPD Dubuque, and this week shall be a very interesting week because this is a very interesting topic that kind of came about. So, I'm just going to get straight into it because, that's just how things tend to be on this podcast. So, I was hanging out on Discord, like everybody should already know, because that's what I do all the time now. And I was asking pretty much people who hang out there regularly, like, hey, I need a topic idea. What do you guys, what do you guys have? What was something that people don't need to hear about?
Hey, I'm making up the same plan you are. Come on. Pitches. Oh, thank you, baby.
Type deal. And somebody suggested negative space. And I'm like, all right, cool. Yeah, I can cover negative space. That shouldn't be an issue, right? And then it kind of came to this realization that I haven't really actually covered use of space as a topic in itself at all. And I don't know why.
What? Knew it. Stop letting him make you realize stuff.
It's actually kind of nice that people are, giving me topic ideas that I don't realize that I haven't covered before, nor have I made any thought process of covering them before. So, instead of covering negative space, which that will be an episode later down the road, I don't know how soon, but it will be down the road.
These aren't even good lies.
Alright, fine. I had to come up with something. You were getting too close.
Instead, I'm just going to cover use of space in general and kind of start out with a generalization of use of space before we actually go into talking about negative space and actually understanding what is negative space, how to use negative space, and what it's able to do, and things of that nature. Which is totally fine because I realize that negative space is something really hard to talk about when you don't really know much of it and you actually need to consider it. The reason why I don't know much of it or never really consider it within the terms of gloving is because I'm an old head. I've been doing this since 2010. That's not something that you would think of back in that time.
It's incredibly disrespectful.
So I have this mentality from back in that time that doesn't think like that. This is why I like hanging out with people on Discord who are much newer to this than I am, because they think so differently than I do, and it's just a nice refreshing way to look at gloving from my old head mentality. So, with that being said, we're going to be covering use of space.
What the hell is even that?
First thing that people need to know, what is space? That's pretty much what you guys should already know what space is, but for the sake of argument, I'm going to assume that you don't, and what I'm talking about is pretty much the area in between yourself as the performer and your viewer, who is your audience. Of course, there's other points of space that you do need to keep aware of. The space around you, as in a 360 perimeter around yourself, and not only that, the 360 perimeter around your viewer, because these are spaces you're able to utilize within your light show. I will get into that in a little bit, but that is basically your definition of the space that we talk about when it comes to gloving, is literally the space in between you and your viewer, around your viewer, and yourself. Like, this is all that encompasses in that space. So, keeping that in mind, and working in different varying levels of spaces that we have at our disposal within the performance, is what's going to accelerate you and elevate you as a performer, in the eyes of your viewer, of course. So, one thing I definitely want you to start thinking about when it comes to use of space and when it comes to talking about use of space, you kind of want to go with like how it is on stage performances, like Broadway and, pretty much just any form of acting in a play of any sorts. If you take that knowledge from theater and apply it here, it's going to make it a little bit easier for you to understand. It's kind of more of a way to codify and understand in a very generalized language that we try to use. So, stage speak is the idea I'm talking about here. So, like center stage, stage left, stage right, front stage, backstage, blah 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 blah.
Daddy, chill.
All that jazz. So, it's something I definitely want you guys to think of, and working in multiple spaces allows you to run to your advantages. And one major thing I definitely want to say is that there's a difference between spatial awareness and depth perception. Definitely want to stress this because a lot of people are going to say that they're the same thing when they are not. And I would certainly say use of space does help lend to your manipulation of depth perception from your viewer, but it's not the same thing. Just want to stress that really hard right now. So with that being said, we are going to try to understand our space and understand how we break down the space, and therefore we're allowed to utilize that space to our advantage. So understanding your grounds, which is pretty much simple. If you understand, art and theater and things of that nature, you'll understand what I mean by grounds. The foreground, the midground, and the background. These are 3 little sections that go from, the very front of the stage to the very back of the stage. It's your forward, backward directional setup. So, you got the foreground, which is like right in front of your viewer. And you got the midground, which is equal distance between your viewer and yourself, and the background where it's closest to you. You have these various spots that you can work at, and that allows for that whole, not necessarily depth perception, but allows to show like things happening farther back and then coming up to your face. You get a little bit more of an impactful performance in that sense, because you're able to move around and not just stay in one spot. I'm not saying that staying in one spot is the worst thing you can do, but staying in one spot the entire show and not really showing any levity of understanding that you can move around in a space, that's the hugest difference between a good Glover and a great Glover, at least in my opinion, because you're utilizing not only what you're able to do, but you're utilizing the space that is provided for you between you and your viewer. So those are your 3 little sections right there, is from front to back, for mid, background. It should be somewhat self-explanatory, but some people have told me that it's not really helpful when I say things like that. So I'm hoping with this explanation it will be a lot easier for you guys to understand. Alright, and then of course we have the stages, which is basically like the grounds, just instead of being forward to back, it's from like left to right. You have stage left, which is to the left of your viewer, not the left of you. That's something I definitely need to stress, that when it comes to these positions, you have to put yourself in the position of the viewer in order to understand their placements on the stage. Okay, so stage left is to the left of the viewer, not to the left of you. So keep that in mind when you do talk about that. Alright, that anytime you talk about the stages, that you're talking within reference of your viewer. Alright, I'm hoping that's enough for me to tell you. So of course, stage left, and you got center stage and stage right. Now you have, front left, back left, blah 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 blah. You have all these little breakdown little segment things within these 2 section of categories between the grounds and the stages. Yes, I understand that, and you can go in that fashion when you want to break it down, and that's fantastic. I love that idea. Another thing I definitely want to say is I don't really have terms for, being on the left side of your viewer, like literally, waving your hands on the left side of your viewer's head, and then of course on the right, or being right behind them. Some people say you shouldn't be using those spaces because they can't see that, but guess what? A human head is not a camera, and it's not a fixed location. It can move around, and it has 2 cameras known as the eyeballs.
Say what?
And so it's actually able to pick up on things like that and move around and keep themselves engaged within the performance, unlike a camera. Unless you use a 360 directional camera, which then that would be interesting, and I would like to see more of that stuff, but I have yet to see people post their 360 view cameras, and that's just something I would like to see. But I digress, as always, because what does a podcaster like to do but digress and talk a bunch of crap onto a microphone?
Do you ever look at someone and wonder what is going on inside their head?
I don't know where I was going with that. Anyways, so understanding these different points within the space, not only that, you have the additional spaces not only beside and behind your viewer, but beside and behind yourself. And one of the things that I like to talk about when it comes to use of space is moving around in the space. And I don't mean like moving your hands around in the space while you're doing your performance. I mean moving your body within the space that is provided. You know what I mean? A very grand example of who I like to refer to when it comes to moving their body within the space provided of, the performance is somebody like Parrot. Parrot incorporates a lot of body movement. Now, I would certainly say if you watch videos, the body movement doesn't really capture very well on camera. However, if you're able to see what he's doing and understand what he is doing, that's just as valuable. because you're getting that information. However, I certainly would say that even if it doesn't capture very well on camera, it's still very enjoyable to watch. Go watch it if you haven't watched any of his stuff. It's really, really important if you want to incorporate full body movements into your performance and allowing you to expand on what you can do with your full body movements. Definitely recommend that, in my opinion. So, one major thing I have to address, because I can already hear a few people making comments that are not going to be correct.
I say whoever threw that paper, your mom's a hoe.
Okay. Depth perception and spatial awareness are two completely different things. Okay, spatial awareness is just you constantly being aware of the space provided around you. Not only around you, but around your viewer and around both of you at the same time. You know, you are constantly aware of the space that is provided, whether it's in a box or in an open field. It doesn't matter. You know you're constantly aware of what's going on around you in terms of a space. And you know how big this space is, you know the parameters of this space. Okay. Depth perception is literally just the perception that your viewer has in terms of depth. And your perception of depth is not going to be the same than your viewer's perception of depth because of just the placement of you two are in the performance, you being the performer and them being the viewer. You know, when it comes to talking about depth perception, you have to make sure you are referring to the viewer and their perception of depth, because if you don't, then people are going to confuse it with spatial awareness, and that's not the correct thing. Spatial awareness is you being perceptively aware of what's going on around you and what you're able to do within the space that is provided. Okay, that's why you have things like platforming and these big dynamic moves that really move around a lot of the space. It's because those people have taken such an awareness around them that they are able to utilize that. Depth perception is literally understanding what is going to look like from the point of view of your viewer and able to manipulate their perception of depth in that manner. Now, I will certainly say yes, spatial awareness does lend into manipulating a viewer's depth perception, but it is not the same thing. It's just like how I'm going to say it right now, the grid is not something of spatial awareness. The grid is a mechanism for us to move around within the space by adding a set parameter feature. So you set parameters within the grid. You have your grid point of X, Y, Z, blah, 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 blah. You have now a definition of your space. You have defined the space within a grid, essentially, and now you are moving about this space within this definition that is called the grid. Do you see where I'm going with this? This is why I say that the grid isn't like this ironclad thing that you have to follow every single time. Though I will say, because I agree with a lot of people who say this, that yes, everything uses a grid in some fashion or another. I'm not saying that you have to or it has to use the grid in order for it to work. It's just everything can use the grid no matter what it is. So definitely want to push that. So understanding the parameters of the space between you and your viewer at any given angle is going to be something that's going to be extremely important for you to do. And what I mean by any given angle, I mean, like, again, look at how Parrot does his full body movements and how he actually moves about the space and actually, like, leans all the way over to the side of his viewer and actually does crazy stuff, and then go to the other side of his viewer and do crazy stuff. That's him utilizing the use of space that is provided to do what he wants to do within his performance. And a lot of the times people go nuts for it, and I love it. That's why I like about seeing his shows on camera, is that when you see these reactions from his viewers, it's just, oh, I love it. It's so great. And I will certainly say that your movements are also going to help convey your usage of space, because if you look at certain movements like King Tutting, for example, it operates on these pivot points, and they're pretty, if you have forearms and stuff, they can be pretty long in the grand movements. So you use these movements to help kind of define the parameters of your space as well, by also configuring the parameters of your space as well. And I'm not saying that you have to stay within one particular set of space. You can manipulate the size of space as well with certain concepts. Again, if you go from finger tutting, you kind of show like this shortened space, but then you go into king tutting, now you expanded the space with grander movements, things like that. When it comes to like liquid and flow type, flow-esque type of movements and stuff, Again, you don't necessarily have to follow the grid, but you're just showing, in a way that I put it, when it comes to things like flow or flow type movements such as liquid, in terms of use of space, instead of thinking of it as the grid, think of it as like a sphere, and your liquid is moving along the edges of the sphere and moving within the sphere and things like that. And it's just, to me, it just makes it a little bit easier to not have to stay within one setting, you know, because some people want to use the grid for their liquid and stuff. That's fantastic. Go ahead, show people how you can do it, because there are ways to make it look good. Not everybody's going to want to be for that. So if you're the type of person who doesn't want to try to use the grid for their liquid type stuff, try to put your space within a spherical manner and operate on that. Okay, that way, you know, you can actually move the sphere around. You know, you're not set in this square format type deal. You can actually be a little bit more fluid with the curves and stuff like that, since you're in a spherical motion and things of that nature. I definitely wanted to stress that. Okay, so understanding how your movements are going to convey is going to be the thing. And again, like I said, don't confuse this thing of spatial awareness and use of space as the grid, when it's not. The grid is just a mechanism for you to define the parameters of the space and move about said parameters of the space. Okay, and of course parameters can change. You just got to make sure that if you're changing your parameters, that what you are doing is being conveyed clearly enough to your viewer that the parameters have been changed. I know that sounds really hard to do, and it really is, and it's one of those things that just takes time and practice to get to, and eventually you'll get there. Do not be discouraged when you don't get it the first time, okay? It's just like how they say in the Matrix, nobody makes it on the first jump. I don't know why I'm referencing the Matrix, it just popped into my head. But anyways, now we're gonna move into depth perception so you guys can understand. Now, when it comes to depth perception, it's really not that hard. If you have taken an art class within any point of your time in elementary school to junior high, you would know what's called a vantage point, a perspective point type deal, where you put a dot on a piece of paper and then you draw lines that converge onto this point, and then you can make all these little ways of perceiving depth by a point on the page, right, on the piece of paper. That's the same idea that you're going to need to think about when it comes to just manipulating depth perception to your viewer. Your viewer's eyeballs are that point. So if you can visualize their eyes being the point and then drawing out from them, allowing you to create this sense of depth, that's going to allow you to manipulate their depth perception, because you understand how it works from that vantage point. One thing I will definitely say that was extremely eye-opening and made me really take in consideration of how to understand depth perception, not only from myself but from my viewer's perspective, and how to manipulate that. There was this little documentary thing, I would say a segment of a documentary, not full-length documentary, but I would say this is a segment from a full-length documentary, where it was talking about Walt Disney and how he came about a lot of his animated movies. And one of the things he's came up with is called the multi-planal camera system. Now, what is a multi-planal camera system? Really simple. He took a picture, you know, whatever he was doing in animation, and separated the grounds into 4 different segments. So you had like the moon being the farthest point in the back. Then you had the background, and then the midground, and then the foreground. Nice. And he was able to manipulate each individual point of these grounds all the way to the moon, therefore giving that sense of depth perception when you're moving and you're like if you're driving down the highway and you look out, the things closest to you are moving really, really fast. The things farthest from you aren't really moving much at all. That's depth perception. Okay, and that's how he was able to utilize depth perception within animation, is because he separated these grounds and separated the pictures basically into parts, and was able to, you know, formulate this. See how he deconstructed the art and then created something by its deconstruction and manipulating individual parts? Do you see where I keep telling everybody about deconstructionalism and what it can do for you in terms of gloving? If you guys can see what my hands are doing right now, which they're just moving around in circles trying to convey this idea to you, Don't know why I keep talking about this. Alright, I need to stop.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Alright, okay. So, just knowing how to utilize the foreground, the midground, and the background in terms of depth perception. Not only that, you're able to manipulate how people understand depth perception by manipulating the parameters of depth perception and what you can do in terms of the fore, mid, and background areas. Okay, not only that, you do have things that, you know, moving from, like, let's just say the foreground of stage right, and you move towards the midground into center stage, and then you get to background center stage, and then you start moving around. You see this little curve thing that I'm going with the stages and stuff in the foregrounds. Okay, that's the idea I'm trying to convey to you guys when it comes to understanding your depth perception. And the one thing you definitely need to make sure you understand when it comes to depth perception is that you have to use a focal point. The point that is where the depth comes to converge to a single point. That is the point that your eye is supposed to be drawn to. For us as a performer, our eyes should be drawn to the eyes of the viewer. Pretty much like right in the center, in between their eyebrows. Like that should be where you should be focusing. That's the point you need to be using in terms of manipulating depth perception, especially for your viewer. So that's the thing, is that you're utilizing the space to mess around with the perception of your viewer. Okay, and spatial awareness does lend to depth perception, but it isn't depth perception, if that makes any sense. It's just, when, to me, the way I go about it is that depth perception is knowing spatial awareness from one fixed point, such as your viewer. And then spatial awareness is just understanding the space provided around you from any given point in terms of angle or whatever. You know, you can actually see beyond just where you are and where your viewer are. You can see it from like a bird's eye view. You can visualize it, all that stuff. Those are the differences between spatial awareness and depth perception, and I hope people understand that. I know I can get a little convoluted on my explanations, but it's the best way I can describe it for you. If it doesn't make sense to you, please let me know so I can try to help convey it clearly to you, so you have some way to understand it, or figure out a way for you to understand it. That way you can. But I will certainly say this right now, but this is the end of the episode, and the code word is avocado toast. If you don't use it in the comment, I know you didn't make it this far. So, that's pretty much all for my episode. I do hope that you enjoy what I had to say. I know that this is a very interesting topic matter within the gloving community. It's not as that it doesn't get talked about as much. It's just when the topic of discussion does come up, it's usually kind of settled very quickly, and it's not that necessarily nobody really learns from each other. It's just the kind of people kind of come to a consensus of sorts. So definitely wanted to cover this. I really had a lot of fun covering this episode. It was very interesting for me to actually do a lot of research on this topic matter. So if you have any questions that I did not cover in this episode, you do have the various social media platforms you can hit me up in. Of course, I do have the Facebook page, which is aptly named The Gloving Paradigm. I also have an Instagram that you can follow me on there and watch me post all pictures of my dogs and random pictures of things of that nature, and maybe a couple random light show videos. Who knows?
What are you doing on the computer? Go outside, so beautiful!
I usually post some of my rough cuts on there because they're usually really fun and interesting to talk about. I also have a YouTube channel where I'm backlogging all my episodes on, so if you want to hit me up there too, you can do that. Maybe you subscribe, maybe you hit the bell, who knows? You just can do something about it. It's just one of those things. Anyways, yes, you do have those various outlets. I do have an email that you can hit me up at, which is muttonchopguy@gmail.com. I'm also on Reddit under the username muttonchopguy. I've had plenty of conversations on Reddit before as well, so don't hesitate to hit me up there. I enjoyed my time on there as well. And of course, but last but not least, if you like the content that I create and wish to help me create better content, please do consider of supporting me on Patreon. As little as $1 a month will go a long ways to me getting closer to my goal of $1,000 a month, where I can do this full time and not have to work a day job in order to supplement all the things I need to buy to keep this going.
Just do it!
Yeah. That's pretty much it. So I do hope you guys enjoy it. I want to thank everybody who has shown support so far. If it wasn't for you guys, it wouldn't have been possible. So please continue supporting me in any way possible. Share my content so people know that I'm out here trying to help newcomers with their stuff. I'm just a humble guy who loves this stuff so much and extremely passionate about it. And all I want to do is just share my love for this craft with the world and find people who also share the same kind of love for this craft. I should really stop trying to be so dramatic and poetic when I'm only talking to a microphone. But yes, thank you to everybody who's listened. I really appreciate it. You guys are absolutely amazing. But I am your host, Peter, aka LPG8 Dubuque, and I'll see you guys all next week.